Snow drifted down in gentle flurries that morning, as if heaven itself had shaken loose a handful of ashes. It coated the wooden platform at Coldwater Station and tucked itself into the corners of frosted windows, nestling into the folds of heavy coats and the lashes of women clinging to hope with gloved hands. The steam train had pulled away nearly 30 minutes ago, its hiss still echoing faintly, leaving behind only silence and one girl who hadn't moved. Eleanor Vale stood at the edge of the depot, leaning against the warped old fence, her carpetbag parked at her feet, and a crumpled letter clenched tightly in one hand. The bottom hem of her brown cloak had stiffened with snowmelt. She wasn't crying now. That part was done. The tears had come earlier, spilled out somewhere along the ride from Missouri, while pine-covered hills slid past, and her sister's silence filled the seat beside her like an unseen presence. That letter in her hand was the one she had written 2 nights back. Just 2 quiet words scribbled onto expensive paper. I decline. A man stood several steps away, arms crossed, a heavy coat fastened all the way to his chin. Silas, that's what they called him. The rancher. He looked broader in person than he had in the photograph, older too. Big-shouldered, weather-worn, with deep creases etched by wind. Snowflakes clung to the gray streaks in his beard like moss on stone. His narrow blue eyes scanned her face. Not for kindness, not for beauty, but for compliance. Eleanor held his gaze and said softly, "I'm not going with you." Silas didn't blink. "You came all this way." "I did. You agreed to marry. And now I've changed my mind." His jaw tightened. "You think I'm too old? Too heavy?" She gave no reply. Truth was, she'd already known those things from the photo. She'd prepared herself for them. What she hadn't braced for was the cold, clinical way he'd approached it, like trading for a work mule. He hadn't asked her name, only confirmed her age. A gust of wind swept between them. Silas took a step back. "Suit yourself." Without another word, he turned, walked to the wagon, and climbed in. Eleanor didn't call out as the wheels began to crunch away into the snow. She just stood there and watched him disappear down the road that led to the Whitlow estate. Alone. She remained there for nearly an hour, arms wrapped around herself as the snowfall thickened. By nightfall, the station master took pity and offered her a bench inside. She curled into herself on the worn wood, her satchel beneath her head, and shut her eyes. But sleep wasn't kind. Every time she drifted off, her mother's face would surface, already buried in Missouri soil. And behind that, her father's furious eyes, just before he tossed her letter into the flames after she told him she wanted something other than the future he'd arranged. She was only 22, and in that tiny, cold station she felt ancient, used up. The next morning, light seeped slowly through the frost-edged window. Clara stirred, her body aching from the bench, then sat up, blinking through the cold. Someone was standing across from her. "You look terrible," Clara said. Eleanor let out a breath. "So do you." Clara Vale, 3 years younger, though somehow always the more grounded one, stood with wind-chapped cheeks, gloves that hung too loose, and a coat that didn't quite fit like it was meant for someone else. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor asked. "I found your letter." Clara held up the page. "You never mailed it. You left it tucked under your mattress." Eleanor blinked. "So you read it, packed a bag, and chased me across half the country?" You were about to throw away a decent shot just because you panicked. I wasn't scared. You were, Clara said, stepping forward. You say no to men like him because it makes you feel like you're in control. But you still end up freezing by yourself in the snow. Eleanor stood, her voice unsteady. You don't get it. I do. It was never about his weight, Eleanor. You hated that he didn't even try to win you over. That silence hit harder than the cold wind curling through the station walls. Clara glanced out the frosted window. Is it true? He didn't even ask your name. Eleanor gave a slow nod. Then maybe I'll give him mine. What? I'm going instead. I'll take your place. You can't. Just watch me. Eleanor's hands began to shake. Clara, don't do this out of guilt. I'm not. I'm doing it because I'm tired of waiting around for life to change on its own. Maybe this isn't love, but it's a roof, it's warmth, it's somewhere that doesn't ask me to shrink. Eleanor's eyes welled. He wanted a wife, not someone to truly know. Clara's smile came small and sad. Then maybe I'll teach him the difference. Outside, the wind began to twist the snow into quiet spirals. A postboy rode by with a telegram, but the Vale sisters didn't look up. The decision had already been made. Not spoken, but settled. The hallway groaned beneath her step as she moved through it. She passed several closed doors, a wall lined with aging rifles, and a tall mirror that caught her reflection when she wasn't prepared to see it. She paused briefly, then looked away and kept walking. In the kitchen, an older woman stirred a pot with the kind of slow, practiced motion that only came from decades of routine. Her gray hair was wound tightly in a knot, her shoulders broad and upright. Clara didn't know her name yet, but soon she would. Irene. She wasn't the type to smile. You're the sister? The woman asked, without turning. I am. Silas isn't back. He rides out early most days. Clara gave a small nod. Can I help with anything? Irene gave her a quick once-over. Not sure what you're used to doing. Clara didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed a bowl from the shelf, filled it with coffee, and took a seat at the wooden table. She didn't wait to be told it was okay. Eleanor would have, but Clara wasn't here to live like someone else's echo. Outside, snow piled clean and deep along the porch railing. Tiny bird tracks dotted the windowsill. And somewhere far off, a horse's hooves broke the morning hush. Just after sunrise, Silas returned, his coat dusted with snow, the front buttons undone, and his breath coming hard. He glanced at Clara briefly but didn't say a word. His nod went to Irene. She set his plate in front of him with quiet efficiency. Clara sat upright at the table, her spoon untouched, waiting, hoping he'd meet her eyes. He didn't. Eventually, his voice broke the silence. You'll need proper boots if you plan to walk the grounds. I didn't think I'd be expected to, she said softly, not as defiance, just honesty. You're not. But snow sticks around for half the year out here. Can't sit still that long, not unless you want your mind to rot. She nodded slowly. He didn't know it, but she understood more than he thought. Underscore 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 underscore. That afternoon, Clara walked the property. The Whitlow Ranch was quiet and vast, functional, but missing warmth. Everything about it felt too large and too cold. Fences were sturdy but bare. The livestock looked well-fed but tired. No flowers bloomed. No paint brightened the walls. No signs that someone cared how the place felt, just what it produced. She wandered past the barn, down the slope where the land fell into a shallow valley ending at a frozen creek. There, standing beside a weathered fence post, she looked out over the hills and saw a pale, cloudless sky that stretched thin as milk. She still didn't know what kind of man Silas really was. Only that he'd built a life with high walls and few doors. then opened one for her. Perhaps because he believed it wouldn't make a difference. Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, Clara sat by the fire mending linens while Silas pored over a ledger under lantern light. Irene remained at the table, darning socks with the air of someone swallowing a decade's worth of opinions. "I'd like to contribute," Clara said in a low voice. Irene arched one brow. "You're contributing just fine sitting there." Silas didn't glance up. "You'll find a way." Clara lifted her gaze. "My hands already know how to work. I'd rather use them than sit and wait for permission." No one responded. Only the quiet scrape of pencil and the wind tapping softly against the walls. Later that night, Clara returned to her room with an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. It wasn't sadness exactly. More like a kind of tension, like something inside her had been packed too full and now she had to walk carefully to keep it from spilling out. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 days went by. When Clara rode into town on Silas's supply wagon, she found a place wrapped in polite faces that cooled the moment she turned away. People squinted at her like they were trying to figure out if they should smile, and usually decided not to. She overheard the whispers. The sister. The second one. The one who stayed. A girl at the general store ignored her question completely. An older man chuckled when Silas introduced her, not as his wife, but simply, "Clara Vale. She's staying on the estate." The sting wasn't sharp, just dull and constant, like a stone in her boot. Small enough to carry, but big enough to never forget it was there. Still, Clara didn't shrink. She swept the floors, learned how to mix feed, wrote letters she folded and never mailed. And every night she listened for Silas's voice, quietly hoping that one day he might use it on her the way a man speaks to someone he wants to be known by. One morning she opened her door and found a pair of boots waiting on the step. Worn but cleaned, lined with rabbit fur. He never said a word about them. She wore them anyway. Underscore 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 underscore. That week, while splitting kindling near the barn, she slipped and nicked her palm on the axe blade. The cut wasn't deep, but it bled. Silas passed by with a saddle over his shoulder. He paused, didn't say anything. Later that night, when she sat down for supper, a roll of bandage and a small tin of ointment had been laid neatly beside her plate. It wasn't tenderness. Not yet. But it was something she recognized. A language made of action. Quiet, useful, clumsy in its own way. And she spoke it too. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, Irene broke the silence at the hearth. "Why'd your sister back out?" she asked, not harshly, just curious. Clara stirred the stew, listening to the fire pop and hiss. It took her a moment before she answered. She was scared of vanishing. Then, after a beat, and I was scared I never would. Irene snorted. You're braver than you look. I don't feel brave. Most brave folks don't. Later, Silas sat in his usual chair, reading, while Clara pulled out her embroidery. Her hands trembled more than she liked, and the thread gathered in puckered bunches. He watched her work for a while. Then, without looking up from his page, he muttered, You're pulling too tight. Clara blinked. You sew? No. But I've watched enough to know. It was the first time she smiled at him. And this time, he saw it. Silas let out a low grunt. I know. You planning to marry her? She's here. She won't stay if you don't let her in. She hasn't left. That was all he gave. And yet, for Clara, it was the most she'd heard him say in one sitting. It wasn't much, but it was something. Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore. That night, as she folded towels near the fire, Silas sat across from her, coat still damp with melted snow. He watched her hands for a moment, then said, You remind me of someone. She waited quietly. My mother. Clara didn't know how to respond to that. She didn't try. But inside, something rooted and steady stirred, eh? Not love, not even closeness, just a kind of earned pride. And in that moment, she understood. She was no longer trying to fit into Eleanor's story. She was starting to craft her own. Underscore, 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 underscore. Underscore, 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 underscore. The next morning, Silas saddled his horse in the gray chill of dawn. As Clara handed him his gloves, their fingers brushed. He didn't pull back. I'll be back before supper, he said. I'll keep a plate warm. It wasn't tenderness. Not exactly. It was something older than sweetness. Quieter. Like seeds sleeping deep in winter soil, waiting. When he rode off, Clara turned toward the porch and watched the valley exhale beneath a pale stretch of sky. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and listened. Not for his voice, not for affirmation, but for the stillness inside her. That no longer sounded like fear. She had arrived in someone else's chapter, but slowly, line by line, she was starting to write her own. And the land, stubborn and slow, was beginning to make room for her. That week, the cold changed its tone. It stopped whispering. It started warning. The wind turned sharp enough to split lips and hard enough to freeze water at the well. Frost glazed the windows until the world outside looked like smudged ghosts. Silas didn't say much about it. He just checked the barn more often, rode longer, came home later, his horse steaming, his coat stiff, his jaw locked like the cold was something he dared to fight. Each evening, Clara waited on the porch, bundled tight in worn mittens, watching for his figure to reappear through the snow. And each night it took longer. The third night he didn't come home at all. Clara paced the parlor in silence, her shadow stretching long across the floorboards. Irene muttered something under her breath about stubborn men, then left stew simmering on the stove. She didn't ask questions. She knew better. By dawn, Clara had fallen asleep in the rocking chair by the fire, her eyes dry but aching, hands still clutching the half-knit scarf she'd worked on through the silence. Then hooves, the sharp clatter of them. The front door swung open with a loud bang. Silas stumbled in, half-frozen, limping, face scraped, shirt streaked with blood at the shoulder. "Horse slipped near the ravine," he said, teeth chattering. Clara didn't speak. She moved. Irene fetched a blanket. Clara cleared the table. The injury wasn't deep, but it was jagged and angry across the top of his arm. She peeled off his coat with careful hands, her fingers steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. "You should have sent someone else," she whispered. He looked away. "There's no one else to send." Her hands paused. Later, after the wound was cleaned and wrapped, and Silas lay still and pale beneath a thick quilt, Clara stayed beside him with a cloth in one hand and a lamp turned low beside the bed. His breathing was shallow, but steady. Sometime around midnight he stirred, his brow furrowed, his lips moved through sleep. "Eleanor." Clara closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she leaned close and whispered, "No, I'm not her, and I don't want to be." The room absorbed the words. He didn't wake, but something in the air shifted, less like sorrow, more like reckoning. For 3 days he drifted in and out of sleep, and Clara stayed. She changed his bandages, warmed broth, read quietly from one of the books he'd left beside the hearth weeks ago. Not because he asked, but because she wanted to understand the man, who hadn't tried to understand her. On the second night, while the fire burned low, she found a carved bird on the mantel, unfinished, knife marks still rough on its wings. There was no name on it, just the quiet mark of a man, trying to shape something delicate with his hands. By the fourth morning, Silas woke clearer. His voice rasped. "Thank you." Clara just nodded. "You shouldn't go riding alone." His next breath almost formed a smile. "Didn't plan to fall. No one ever does." That evening, Clara carried her sewing to the parlor again. Silas sat across from her, one arm in a sling, staring into the fire like it held answers he hadn't figured out how to ask. "You ever get tired of being strong?" he asked. "Every single day," she said. He glanced at her hands. Her stitching had improved, even more confident. He gestured with his chin. "You teach yourself that?" "Didn't have anyone else to learn from." He leaned back in his chair. "Guess we've got that in common." And just like that, a door creaked open. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to let something real pass through. Not love, not yet, but something close, something true, recognition. underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, Silas sat by the window, sharpening his knife. Clara shelled beans at the table. The silence between them had changed. No longer stiff or strained, but easy, shared. Outside, word traveled faster than any wagon. A delivery boy stopped by with supplies. And with him came murmurs. What folks in town were starting to say. People in town had started whispering that Silas Whitlow ended up with the wrong sister, and that Clara was just playing nurse to earn her place. She heard it. So did Silas. Neither of them said a word. But that evening he went to the parlor and built a shelf, small, plain, tucked neatly into the corner by the rocking chair. It held 3 books. 2 of them were hers. She didn't cry. She just sat down, opened the top one, and turned the first page. Underscore 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 underscore. Winter dragged on. Days blended together. Silas got better slowly but with steady footing. He didn't talk much, but he also stopped riding so far. Now and then he'd walk the fence line with Clara, showing her where the frost had split the wood and how to pack earth tight around each post once the thaw rolled in. One crisp morning, as Clara swept snow from the porch rail, Silas approached with something in his hands, a small wrapped bundle. Inside a pair of gloves, not from any store, stitched by hand. The seams weren't perfect. The lining was thick and warm. I remember you said the ones you had didn't fit, he muttered. Clara turned the gloves over in her hands. Did you make these? I tried. She slid them on, flexed her fingers. They're perfect. Silas gave a short nod just once. Like any more words might unravel something. Then, more quietly. I don't always know how to show things. You don't have to, she told him. You just did. And the 2 of them stood like that, side by side in the snow, not speaking. But something was beginning to thaw. Underscore 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 underscore. The fire didn't come in a blaze. It wasn't sparks or heat. It was warmth, soft, earned, patient. You could see it in the small gestures. The way Silas poured her coffee before his own. How Clara laid out his coat each morning without saying a word. How she moved through the house now not as someone visiting, but as someone who had found her place inside it. Underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 underscore. And then came the moment she broke. They were in town. Silas needed wire. She'd gone to the mercantile for thread. Near the pot-bellied stove, 2 ranch wives fell silent when she passed. She's the substitute, one of them whispered. Not even his wife, the other added. Clara stopped. Turned. I may be someone's sister, she said, voice steady. But I didn't come here to be a ghost. They didn't reply. just stared. She left. When Silas found her outside by the wagon, her cheeks flushed with cold and fury, he didn't say anything, not until they were back home. As she unwound her scarf, he finally spoke. "You don't owe them anything." "No," she said, "but I owe myself the truth." He leaned against the doorframe, studying her like he was really seeing her for the first time fully. "Then say it," he told her. She took a long breath. "I want to stay. Not because you let me. Not as someone's replacement or favor. I want this life for myself. And if this is it, I want it to belong to me." Silas didn't move at first. Then he gave a single nod. "Then stay. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, Clara picked up the bird carving and placed it gently on the new shelf. Later, she noticed him in the hallway. Not stepping closer. Just watching. Still. Unmoving. Present. And something deep inside her. Something that had lived too long without light. Finally flickered to life. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the start of something real. Something that might grow into it with time. Underscore 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 underscore. The snow started pulling back, but winter didn't let go easily. It lingered like an uninvited guest, spread out in ghost-colored sheets across the fields, curled into the shady edges of the land. The mornings still bit at her skin. Icicles hung like teeth from the eaves. And yet, change was coming. There were muddy prints where boots had passed. Birds darted low, chasing seeds through the thaw, and the air carried the damp scent of soil beginning to wake. Inside the Whitlow house, the fire didn't need to roar anymore just to keep them warm. Clara got up earlier now, not out of obligation, but rhythm. Her feet had learned the soft creak of the hallway. She knew the weight of the kettle, the feel of the drawer where Irene kept the good spoons. She was no longer a visitor here. She belonged. One morning, as she sat braiding her hair at the kitchen table, Silas sipped his coffee across from her. "Do you miss your sister?" he asked. Clara didn't lift her head. "Sometimes. Mostly. I miss who we were before the world made her sharper than she ever wanted to be." He nodded. "You're not like her." "No," she said. But she wasn't wrong either. She knew this life wasn't what she wanted. Silas looked at her more carefully now. "And you, do you want it?" She paused, then gave him a soft smile. "I didn't think I would, but some things grow better in snow than in sun. You just have to be patient." His eyes didn't leave her face for a long while. That same afternoon, a telegram arrived. Clara opened it by the fire. Even before she'd read the last line, her hands had already gone cold. "Coming to retrieve you. Room and carriage. L." Just one word escaped her lips. "Oh." Moments later, Silas walked in, brushing snow from his sleeves. "You all right?" She handed him the telegram. He read it once, then quietly set it on the mantel. Clara looked at the flames, then spoke. "She thinks I'm still something you can return, or something you kept. She's not wrong to care," she added. "She's just wrong to think I didn't choose this." Silas didn't respond at first. The lamp between them flickered. "I didn't keep you here," he said. "No," she agreed. "You didn't hold me, but you never asked me to stay either." His voice dropped, quieter than before. "Would it have made a difference?" Clara hesitated. "Maybe." They didn't speak for the rest of the night. The silence wasn't heavy, just full. Clara packed slowly, not because she meant to leave, but because she still didn't know what staying might demand of her. Her coat, her scarf, the gloves he'd stitched together with those rough, uncertain hands. She folded each one carefully and laid them beside the bird carving on her nightstand, a quiet pile of things that now carried weight. That evening, Silas didn't take his place at the table. She found him out in the barn, bent over a saddle that hadn't been touched in months. He was tightening the straps like it still had somewhere to go. She stood in the doorway, breath fogging in the cold. "Eleanor always filled the room," he said, not looking at her. "When she said no, I thought maybe the sister would be quieter, easier. But I didn't come empty," Clara replied. "I brought my own fire. You came here with nothing. Maybe, but I'm leaving with something." He turned just enough to glance back at her. "Are you leaving?" "I don't know yet. Is there anything I could say that'd make you stay?" She stepped forward, the distance between them shrinking more in feeling than in feet. "You've already said it. Every time you made space for me without even knowing it." They stood in silence after that. No movement, no rush, nothing more needed. Back inside, Clara sat by the fire and began a letter. Not to Eleanor, to herself. By morning, a carriage creaked into the yard. Snow crunched beneath its wheels. Eleanor Vale stepped down, wrapped in fur and her usual pride, her gaze sweeping across the ranch, the porch, and finally landing on her sister. Standing straight, apron dusted with flour, snow threaded into her braid like silver. "You look tired," Eleanor said. "I've been working." There was a pause. Then, "You don't have to do this." "I know." "Then come home." Clara stepped forward. Her voice was calm. "I am home." Behind them, Silas appeared on the porch. He said nothing, just watched the way he always did. Eleanor's eyes shifted from Clara to Silas. "You care for him?" Clara didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. The way she stood said enough, solid, unapologetic. "I won't beg you," Eleanor murmured. "You never did." And then, unexpectedly, Eleanor nodded. A small, rare gesture of grace. She turned back to the carriage, paused once to glance at Silas. He returned the look with a simple nod. And then she left. No fanfare, no argument. Only the soft crunch of wheels disappearing into the white. underscore 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 underscore. Silas stepped down from the porch. Clara stood at the gate, hands bare to the cold. He stopped beside her. "You didn't have to prove anything," he said. "I wasn't trying to prove," she answered. "I was choosing." She looked up at him, steady. "I'll stay. But not as a replacement. Not as your sister-in-law." "Then who?" "As myself." He held her gaze. "That's all I ever wanted." "No," she said quietly. "It's not. But it's a start." Underscore 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 underscore. That night, she placed her things back in their drawers. Not hurried, but intentional. Later, Silas walked into the parlor with a book in hand. He held it out. "Thought this one might suit you." She opened it. Inside, on the first page, in his careful, uneven handwriting. For Clara, who stayed. She didn't cry, but she rested her hand on the words like they were something holy. Underscore 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 underscore. Spring didn't come all at once, but it would, and this time Clara had space to wait for it. Beneath the snow, seeds were still curled tight in the soil. Patient, alive, ready to rise when the time was right. Underscore 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 underscore. Then came the storm. No warning. No build-up. The sky collapsed into a deep gray roar. The kind that seemed to swallow everything in sight. Snow slammed sideways against the windows, and the barn shutters rattled like drums at war. Silas moved through it without panic, like a man who'd met worse. Lantern in one hand, coat pulled tight, eyes narrowed against the ice. Clara watched from the porch, breath catching in her throat as he disappeared into the white. She'd never seen him that angry before. Not loud, but tight, drawn, locked down in a way that shook her. Not rage. Resolve. Underscore 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 underscore. It had started earlier that morning. A letter arrived from Clive Mercer, a land-hungry rancher who had power, property, and very little patience. He wanted Silas's northern stretch. The boundary lines were muddied, the soil frozen, but the message was clear. Either Silas handed it over or got ready to defend it. Silas read the letter once, then tossed it aside. Let him come. Clara stood by the stove, voice steady. "Do you want to fight?" "No," he replied. "But I'm done being pushed." underscore 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 underscore. That evening, just as the snow thickened into white rage, Mercer arrived. He came on horseback with two men flanking him. Their horses dripped frost, their mouths full of swagger. Silas met them in the yard. No rifle, just his coat, his silence, and the kind of stare that makes lesser men question themselves. Clara stood in the doorway, shawl wrapped tight, heart beating too hard to speak. "So this is what softened you?" Clive sneered. "A girl playing house?" Silas's voice sliced through the storm. Sharp, measured. "Say what you came to say. I'm saying this, you've got till spring thaw to get off that land. You're not who you used to be, Whitlow. Everyone sees it." Silas stepped forward, slow and steady. "No, I'm not the man I used to be. But you ought to be thankful for that." Clive chuckled, full of disdain. "And what's she gonna do? Bake me into submission?" Clara stepped off the porch. No rush, no raised voice. She simply walked forward until she stood beside Silas, shoulder to shoulder in the falling snow. Silas didn't look at her. He looked at Clive and said, "She's going to stand right here with her spine straight and her name her own. And that's already more than you've ever managed." Clive's grin faltered. Silas's tone softened. "But the steel in it didn't go anywhere. You want the land? Take it to court. But until then, I suggest you ride on home before the storm buries your pride right alongside your saddle." The silence that followed cut clean and sharp. Clive spat into the snow, turned his horse, and left without another word. Silas didn't move, not until they vanished into the curtain of white. Then he turned to Clara. "You didn't have to come out here." "I did." He nodded once, and something shifted in his expression. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't gratitude. It was belief. They made their way back to the porch, the sound of their boots crunching in the snow the only thing between them. Their shoulders close enough to touch, but not quite there yet. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. Not empty, not expectant, just at ease. Clara brewed tea. Silas moved through the room's lighting lamps. And Irene, without a single word, brushed past Clara in the kitchen, reaching out to touch her arm. It was brief, unexpected, soft. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. Clara gave a small, certain smile. "I do now." Underscore 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 underscore. The storm stretched across 3 full days. They didn't say much during that time, but their silences were no longer strained. They had found a rhythm in the quiet. Silas fixed a broken hinge on the barn door. Clara baked a loaf of bread with hands that fumbled but finished. At night, they sat near the fire. Not always together, not always talking, but close enough that the warmth reached them both. Underscore 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 underscore. One evening it was Silas who broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Clara looked up from her mending. "Regret what?" "Taking her place." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to the little shelf in the corner, and picked up the unfinished bird carving. She held it in her hands, the grain rough under her fingers. "I didn't take her place," she said finally. "I found mine." Silas gave a slow nod. "If you asked me to marry you, I'd say yes." Clara chuckled softly. "You've got that backwards. You're supposed to ask me." He gave a slight shrug. "Words were never my strong suit." "Then don't say them," she said, setting the bird back on its shelf. "Show me." He stepped across the room and took her hands in his. Calloused, warm, steady. No poetry. No grand speech. Just this. "I'll be here. Each morning. Every season. Every word I don't know how to say. I'll try to show you instead." She didn't cry, but everything she felt was in the way she looked at him. And that was enough. Underscore 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 underscore. When spring finally crept in, they planted lilacs along the fence line. Silas dug each hole with quiet focus. Clara followed behind, tucking the roots into the softened earth with care. She spoke to them in whispers, as if they were small children who needed encouragement to grow. Years later, folks would say the Whitlow Ranch always smelled of lilacs once the frost lifted. They didn't talk much about what had happened. The switch, the sister who left, the one who stayed. But they remembered Clara. How she arrived without fanfare. How she endured without complaint. And how the rancher with the hard edge became something steadier in her presence. After that winter, people respected him more, feared him less. And if you stood still enough near the porch at dusk, you might hear a woman reading aloud to someone who didn't need the story, just like the sound of her voice. You might notice 2 rocking chairs instead of 1. You might spot a carved wooden bird on a shelf beside the fire. And in that moment, you'd understand something deep. Some stories begin with fire, but the ones that endure, they take root in the snow. Underscore 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 underscore. If you've ever felt like the second choice, the wrong name, the one who showed up after the door had already been closed, listen closely. The best parts of life aren't always announced. They grow slowly, quietly, like lilacs, pushing their way up, through snow, and the hearts we assume are locked shut, maybe waiting for someone who doesn't knock, just steps in and stays.